Hello friends, and welcome back to Once in a Six Side. If you're here from Gams' channel, thank you for stopping by, it's great to have you here. In this video, I'm going to be tackling an entire gaming table, and well, it's a skirmish sized, kill team size, roughly 30 by 22 inch size table, but still, it was no small feat. I did still try and employ as many time-saving devices as are available to me to err on the side of, actually being completed versus incomplete forever. And my hope is you might find at least one valuable trick to add to your toolbox here, or even just some inspiration to tackle that table build you've been daydreaming about for months now. When it comes to tabletop pieces, I believe done now is better than done right. The foundation of this build is going to be the spooky terrain set from Commissar Gamza's Patreon. As many of you know, I'm now in collaboration with Gamza on his Patreon to ensure the files that get delivered are all pre-supported and prepared for the best possible 3D printing experience. So if you like them, you know where to get them. Alright, so this build, like many, begins at the computer. I drag all the files I'll be needing for this build into Cura and prepare multiple back-to-back prints. In the interest of time, I'm using a 0.3mm layer height and lightning infill. Did you know about lightning infill? If not, this is going to blow your mind. Check this out. So before I found out about lightning infill, I used to use cubic subdivision, and I would use it at around 12% infill density. Now if I slice this file, we'll see that it comes out to about 11 hours and 50 minutes and use 174 grams of material. And looking at the infill, it looks like this. So cubic subdivision's great. It adds durability to the print. It'll stop the walls from flexing and stuff like that if you press on them. So if you value that, just use cubic subdivision. But if you want to save some time and some material, you can come over here to infill, switch this to lightning, and I'm going to keep the infill density the same at 12% and slice this again. And there we are, we can see this has dropped down now to 10 hours and 1 minute. And better yet, we've dropped all the way down to 124 grams of material. And looking at the infill, now we can see the part is essentially hollow. And the way lightning infill works, as you can see indicated here by these orange bits, it sort of grows and branches out as the print goes. It's very clever. So a good way to save a little bit of time, and particularly a good chunk of filament, use lightning infill. I've found that having the parts hollow like this, that they have been totally adequate for gaming pieces. Like they're not going to break if you drop them or they fall off a table or whatever. I've printed a bunch of terrain at 0.3mm layer height in the past as well, and yeah, while it's not as good as it could be, it's still miles ahead of gaming with pots and pans. So I think it won't detract from the final result all too much. A few days later, and I've got this. Rest now, dear Ender. You've earned it, buddy. I then spent a little bit of time removing any support material and gluing together the parts that required assembly, and busted out the airbrush to try out an idea I had. I began by spraying Vallejo black primer over the parts, but since they're already black, I wasn't worried about getting good coverage. Just enough on there for the next layer of paint to stick to is all I needed. Then I switched over to this stuff, Vallejo liquid metal copper. This is an enamel-based paint, I believe, so it doesn't get on with water. You've got to clean your brushes with alcohol after using it. My idea was to zenithal highlight with this, figuring that over the black, it could look pretty cool. And hey, look at that gorgeous result. It totally does. At least in person it does. My camera hates it apparently. What's with all these rainbows? I then found out through talking to some camera geeks that this is called moire, and they gave me some tips to deal with it, but I was still really struggling to capture these pieces on film. Oh, hold on a minute, what's this? A Sony ZV-E10 and a Sigma 18-55 f2.8? Oh yes, let's switch it up. Cheers Dad, you're a legend. And cheers to you too, Canon 700D. You've been a really cool little gadget to own all these years, and I'll treasure you always. Now, this is a lot closer to what I'm seeing. There's still more, but I kind of expected that after my chat with the camera geeks, but it's a lot more manageable now. I picked up a couple of RGB lights too, so I'm officially a YouTuber now. Unicorn vomit is key to a good production. So with the parts looking properly spiffy, I set about establishing my board size. I wanted something lightweight and cheap, and this sheet of XPS foam I thought ought to do the trick. Sure, it's not the strongest material in the world, but I'm not going to be putting any crazy load on it either, so it should be fine. Moving right along, I measured out my board size and scribed 2 lines, a test cut and the final cut. I wanted to try out the score and snap method for XPS foam to make sure it'll work for me. And sure enough, that's legit a useful way to part this stuff out. Good job. The finish is a little rough and crumbly, but quickly hitting it with a sanding block smoothed it out. Now, to play around with placement for all the parts, I already had a rough idea of what I wanted to do. It was just a matter of experimenting a little bit before finally committing to a layout. While I'm doing this, I'm thinking about firing lines, cover, and room for the models to move through. I knew I'd be using some homemade modeling compound for this job, and as luck would have it, one of these arrived in the mail for me. Let me show you a neat little trick. If you ever order something and it comes in one of these padded mailers, don't throw it out, because the insides are lined with paper pulp, the perfect ingredient for our homemade sculptor mold. I cut both sides open and scraped out the recycled paper, and you'll probably want to wear a mask while you make this stuff. It can get pretty dusty. Just look how much paper was in this one mailer. Not bad. The only other ingredient we need is plaster of Paris. This stuff is dirt cheap, so there's no reason not to pick up a bag next time you're visiting your local hardware store. I think about a cup ought to do it. Mixing it thoroughly through by shaking up the bag, I then do a small test to make sure it's good. I also wanted to run a little experiment here with a sprinkling of sand on top and then pressing it in. This actually worked really well, however I ended up going for a different approach to my ground texture, and you'll see that real soon. Working in small batches, I went around each of the parts and began working the modeling compound into the XPS, creating small little slopes or inclines leading up to the edges of each part. I'm trying to create the impression that these structures have been neglected for a while, and the earth is slowly gobbling them up. I then realized I should probably glue these down first. It would make this job a whole lot easier. So I busted out the forbidden peanut butter maxi nails. I know from experience that this bonds incredibly well to XPS foam without melting it. However, this liquid nails will melt it, so save your money, just get the maxi nails. It's cheaper too. I'm not sure if the names extend to the rest of the globe, but here in Australia at least, that's what we've got, and that's what I've found. With the parts all glued down, I had a much easier time finishing up with the modeling compound. Now for some ground texture. My original plan was to cover the entire ground in the modeling compound, and then sort of like press the structures down into it, but I wasn't sure I would have enough for that. So then I thought, I'll just put PVA glue down everywhere and then sprinkle sand on top. But then I had another idea. Silicon gap filler. I made some battle mats a while back using this stuff, and I realized it would be perfect here because it would seal everything in to create a nice durable surface on this table, while also providing an excellent medium for some ground texturing. So into a bucket goes 2 tubes of this stuff, followed by a generous splash of alcohol to thin it down, a squirt of black paint, and sand. The end result ends up looking kind of like concrete, which is interesting. I wasn't sure yet what the best way to spread this around would be, so I brought a few different tools to experiment. I tried this thing first, but it was going down a little thick. Next up, this small wooden spoon. It's too slow. Then a brush. Perfect. The brush made short work of spreading this stuff around, and keeping it thin too, which was very important. The drying times for this is at least 8 hours, but can easily go much longer if you put it down too thick. Also, if you've never worked with silicone before, you should know it's pretty stinky, so crack a window and maybe put a fan on. With the ground fully covered, I began using the flat side of this sponge brush to add texture all over. Doing this, plus the sand already mixed in, I think is going to create a really interesting look to this table. Okay, so it's the next day, the silicon is dry, and it was time to paint it up. I started by going around the edge with a couple coats of gesso. I've never used this stuff before, but my hope here is that it would create a protective shell around the edge of this board. And it kind of worked, though I'll probably come back at some other time to add plastic card or something else around the edge here because I'm not super confident about this gesso coat as it is. I then took some cheap acrylic brown paint of the craft variety, and to redden it up a bit, I mixed in some red ink. This would be my base coat. I did my best to cover all of the ground, leaving the structures, though not too concerned if some paint did end up on them. Next up, one of my favorite colors, yellow ochre. Applying it less thoroughly this time, I believe they call this overbrushing. I went over all the brown. Then mixing some white paint into the yellow ochre to lighten it up a bit, I did the same thing. Getting close now. Final step, unbleached titanium white. Another of my favorites. This time, instead of overbrushing, I busted out a nice big makeup brush and set about dry brushing the entire board. Terrain pieces too. That then just leaves the odd grass tuft, applied with PVA glue for extra stick. And much like our minis, painting the rim black. Now, real quick before I show off the final result, please do check out my Cults 3D page where I sell terrain Stls. So far I have two available, the Imperial Outpost and Comms Tower. Both come ready to print and will make fine additions to your gaming tables. I put a lot of time and effort into making these videos, and so a purchase on my Cult store is a great way to support me and help me grow this channel. It's my hope that someday I can make enough revenue in this space to hang up my hat as a delivery driver and instead work full-time from home creatively. That would honestly just be a dream come true, and so every bit of help I can get with that is truly, truly appreciated. Whether it's your subscription to the channel, a like on a video, or leaving a comment, these are all encouraging little helping hands toward that destination. Thank you so much for your support, and now, the grand reveal. Man, I am so happy with how this turned out. The ground texture from the silicon and the sand is just on point, and these ruins from Gams' Patreon look just awesome. I'm stoked with the outcome of this, And you know what? It's so light and everything is so well secured to the top that I reckon I could hang this on a wall. What do you think? I really want to get a game in on this thing ASAP. Speaking of which, would that be something you'd like to see on the channel? I love playing one-page rules firefight, and a battle report for that game with this table I think could be a lot of fun. So let me know. Alright, well that'll do it for this one. Thank you for watching, and I hope you've enjoyed this build, and maybe even are feeling inspired to make one yourself. Have a good one, and I'll be seeing you again soon. Bye bye.
Shut up! Shut the fuck up! I am having a stroke. I am having a stroke. Oh well. Oh well, cunt. I don't know. Are you all there?
I don't think so.
I think so. Fucking problem. Straight up. Straight up, cunt.
Shut the fuck up!
Shut the fuck up!